our senior level leaders, what do? All those people are still in those positions. If they've retired, they're on the board at Raytheon or General Dynamics or something like that. So when we look at lobbyists and politicians and think tanks and that military-industrial complex, that's a real thing. That's an animal. And when it's not held to check and no one's held accountable, you get things like the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, essentially rushing to our death after 20 years of being able to prepare and plan for that eventuality. It's inexcusable.
What do you make of the state of the military at the moment and the state of the way that it seems politics has really infected the military, at least in the last, say, 5, 10 years, that it didn't seem it did before, or maybe we didn't know about it before?
Yeah, so obviously politics has been creeping into all aspects of our culture for a long time. People like to point to Hollywood, but hey, look at there's Wall Street, more and more into sports. I mean, almost every education, of course, but really every aspect of society. We thought the military was immune from that, and we found out over the last couple of years that it is most certainly not. And really, not even talking about that, the wokeness in the military, or anything like that. We can just go and look at 20 years of our experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how none of our senior military leaders have been held accountable for the decisions that they made. And we can go back and look at each and every one of these guys with stars on their shoulders, sitting in front of Congress, saying the exact same things year after year. You can take the year off there, and it's a different person, but the audio will be exactly the same. Meeting our milestones. The Afghan National Army is getting closer to being able to stand up on their own. We just need more resources, more people, more funding, more equipment, whatever it is. And then the Afghanistan Papers was published, and I hope more people read the Afghanistan Papers by Craig Whitlock, because what he does is takes these interviews that these senior level leaders thought were going to remain classified, juxtaposes it with what they were saying in front of Congress, so to the American people, to Congress, to their troops, and essentially you have two separate stories, 180 out from one another. And so they are essentially lying to their troops, lying to Congress, lying to the American people, and these senior level leaders continue to fail up. And we see what happens when we continue to do that year after year and hold no senior level leaders accountable. We have a withdrawal from Afghanistan that looks like what we saw last August, which the media, of course, doesn't even talk about anymore, but we all got to watch with our own eyes. And it's also why everyone in this country with a little bit of common sense could comment on it, because you didn't need to have a touch point with the military or study strategy or tactics or military history at all. You could just look at that and apply some common sense, which is something that Karl von Clausewitz said was the most important aspect of any military leader, any combat leader, is having common sense. And so anyone could look at that and say, why are we giving up this tactically advantageous position at Bagram and putting America's sons and daughters in a tactically disadvantageous position when we've had 20 years to prepare for this eventuality? And this is the best the United States military can do. This is the best that we have. This is what we are giving our sons and daughters, as we're putting them in this position. Now, if you've done that at the tactical level as an 03, so as a captain in the Army or a lieutenant in the Navy or something like that, or as a chief in the Navy or something, a sergeant, you'd be court-martialed, sent home if you just. And our senior level leaders, what do? All those people are still in those positions. If they've retired, they're on the board at Raytheon or General Dynamics or something like that. So when we look at lobbyists and politicians and think tanks and that military-industrial complex, that's a real thing. That's an animal. And when it's not held to check and no one's held accountable, you get things like the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, essentially rushing to our death after 20 years of being able to prepare and plan for that eventuality. It's inexcusable.
So I don't know if you know this about me, but every August I go off the grid for a month. No phone, no news, no communication with the outside world. I literally disappear for a month. So the August, this past August, obviously, was the Afghanistan withdrawal. So I did not know that until September 1st. I come back and I have a guest host. It was Adam Carolla this past year, who kind of caught me up to speed on everything. So I was seeing all those videos, 2 weeks later, all in real time for the first time in front of my audience. And what I said to Adam watching them in real time was, this, from what I could tell, just seeing it all right in front of me, right at that moment, all at once, that this could not have been worse. That if you had intentionally tried to bungle something at the highest level, that's pretty much what it would have looked like. Do you think that's a fair estimation? I mean, 20 years from now, when we look back on this thing, what do you think the post-mortem is going to look like?
Well, if it's honest, it's going to be exactly what you just said right there. You could not have bungled this worse had you actually been trying. And once again, it's that accountability piece. But what we had 20 years of our own experience to look back on, to take lessons from, to apply going forward as wisdom. We didn't even have to go back to the Soviets. I mean, we should have earlier on gone back to 79 to 89, the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. We didn't have to go back to the 3 British incursions in the 1800s, early 1900s. Certainly didn't have to go back to Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, although we could have, and we could have taken lessons from all of those things and applied them to our present situation as wisdom. Yet we did not. We think of things in terms of 4-year election cycles, 8-year election cycles for the real deep thinkers among us. But what we neglect to do is go back in the pages of history, take those lessons, and apply them going forward. And that's obviously to the detriment of our sons and daughters who are out there on the front line. And we saw in Afghanistan, 13 lost their lives, to say nothing of those who lost arms and legs and can't walk anymore, and are dealing with the post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injury from a position that they were put in by our senior level leaders.
Is it crazy to you how quickly we just move off things like that? I mean, as you said, it was the longest war in American history. We were there for 20 years. It was very unclear to a lot of people sort of why we were there and how it was connected to 9/11 and all of that stuff. But that basically, we had 2 or 3 weeks of sort of news cycle and outrage. And now it's completely not talked about. And, we've got this situation in Ukraine right now. And it's like, do our allies trust us? Does anyone believe what we're doing? Do we have the right people in charge? Any of that?
Yeah, no, it's those are valid questions, and as it pertains to what's going on in Afghanistan vis-a-vis, or in Ukraine vis-a-vis Russia, once again, we had a lot of data in which to look at and predict what was going to happen. In my second novel, True Believer, I actually use a false flag operation. It came out in 2019, but I use a false flag operation to instigate a Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I got that just by studying the situation at the time. So I was writing that in 2016, 2017, editing it in 2018, so it could come out in 2019. But that research should have shown anybody that, hey, this is essentially inevitable, because the Russian population is in a steep decline. It has been since the end of the Cold War. And they are a couple generations away from there being no ethnic Russians. And they're certainly very close to not being able to field an army in the numbers that they have been able to in the past. And at the time, it was about 2022. There's actually a book called The Accidental Superpower by Peter Zion, where it looks at geography and demographics as far as world history and superpowers and how that has played in. And 2022 was about the last year that Russia had before they would not be able to field an army capable of invading Ukraine, because they need those ethnic Russians. And Ukraine has the largest population of ethnic Russians in the world outside of Russia. So these things were predictable. And then, of course, we can go back to World War I, World War II, end of the Cold War, promises made. We rarely put ourselves in our enemy's shoes and red game things from that position, red cell things from that position. But we should do that more often, because we'd make wiser decisions.
What do you think the role of the American military should be at this point? It seems like it really has sort of changed, or it seemed like it was changing, at least, under Trump. There was a lot of peace. There was a lot of like, oh, if we mess with this guy, we don't know what he's going to do. You remember he dropped that mother of all bombs in Iraq. Nobody understood why. And it was like, well, it got pretty quiet there pretty quick. And now we're in this Ukraine situation. What do you think the general role of America worldwide should be?
Well, it should be one of respect and fear that goes along with that, because that military is really it's like the Second Amendment to the First Amendment. The military, it backs up everything that we say and that we do. So if we have this strong military that is more concerned with other people's borders rather than our own, well, essentially we're seeing an invasion across our southern border right now that's, once again, not really talked about in the mainstream press. It's been going for quite some time, but we have all sorts of issues like that. And and we have a Department of Defense. After World War II, it used to be the Department of War, the War Department. Then it changed, 1947, and really since then we haven't done very well in conflicts. And that's the exact same time that accountability shifted. And by shifted, I mean that we started not holding our senior level leaders accountable. When we talk about George Marshall, He's most known for the Marshall Plan after World War II, but really what's more important is what he did in the lead up to World War II and during World War II, which were fire those leaders who didn't cut it. So he put all those guys in positions whose names we know today as leading us through, that led us through World War II to victory. But had he not done that and just let those people who were in those places that weren't cutting it, I mean, who knows how World War II would have turned out. But he fired people that didn't cut it. After World War II, and we shift over to the Department of Defense, things start to change. Korea, Vietnam, and obviously what we see today. And we, for whatever reason, we're hesitant to hold these senior level leaders accountable. But we can trace it all the way back to the end of World War II and in 1947. But today, we were in an interesting position in that, yes, we have we have 20 years of experience, and we have this technology that has just been racing forward when it comes to our weapon systems. And so we take those tactical lessons learned, take these new weapons and the technology as far as tracking and targeting and all the rest of it. We should have the most feared military on the planet. Yet we have a border that's just porous, essentially. And we see what we saw in Afghanistan. So with all that technology, all those lessons, we still get that outcome in Afghanistan. So if I'm the enemy and I'm looking at that, that gives me some wiggle room, and that gives me some lessons learned to apply to my future battle plans that probably go more than 4 to 8 years in advance. I can think decades. I can think even centuries if I'm China, and I can apply these lessons to those battle plans.
If you're looking for more honest and thoughtful conversations about lifestyles instead of nonstop yelling, check out our lifestyle playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, check out our full episode playlist. They're both right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.